Kaelan O'Connor, Olympus Medical's golden boy, collapsed with a sudden, violent cough, a crimson blossom erupting from his lips. One moment, he was vibrant youth, the next, a life rapidly draining away onto the pristine floor of the clinic. A wave of frantic energy ripped through the room. Doctors Vargas and Li, typically unflappable titans of surgery, moved with a desperation rarely seen, their faces grim as monitors shrieked a dying symphony. Internal hemorrhage, Vargas declared, his voice tight with an unfamiliar helplessness. Too close to the heart, too fast. We're losing him. Dr. Li confirmed, her usually cool demeanor cracking with the weight of a life slipping through their fingers. Death hung heavy, an invisible shroud. Amidst the controlled chaos, Nurse Safiya Rahman, a quiet, unassuming presence, stood at the periphery. Her hands, usually deft and busy, were still. No one met her gaze, no one sought her input, her uniform blending into the background of more esteemed white coats. But as she watched Kaelan's vibrant energy fade, a flicker of something sharp and knowing ignited deep within her quiet eyes, an understanding far beyond their frantic despair, a silent promise to a dying boy. The sterile air of Olympus Medical, usually a crisp testament to its gleaming precision, now thrummed with a raw, desperate energy. Kaelan O'Connor lay pale and still, his young body fighting a war it was rapidly losing. Monitors pulsed a relentless, escalating alarm, each beep a stark reminder of life draining away. Dr. Santiago Vargas, typically a force of nature, his charisma as sharp as his scalpel, paced the confines of the critical care bay like a caged lion. His brow was furrowed, a roadmap of frustration etched onto his handsome face. The clotting factor, it's too volatile, he muttered, running a hand through his dark hair. Any incision, however minor, risks uncontrollable dissemination. We'll bleed him out on the table before we even reach the source. Dr. Jian Li, a specialist whose intellect was as formidable as her composure was icy, stood by the monitors, her gaze dissecting the data with clinical detachment. Yet, even her usually impassive features held a flicker of something akin to alarm. A direct surgical approach is contraindicated, she stated, her voice precise, almost robotic. The rare genetic anomaly in his coagulation cascade makes traditional intervention suicidal. We need to stabilize, but how? Her question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken defeat. The ensuing debate was a clash of titans, each doctor proposing increasingly complex, high-risk maneuvers, born from years of cutting-edge research and privileged practice. Vargas, the visionary chief surgeon, argued for an audacious, experimental endovascular coiling, pushing the boundaries of what was considered safe. Li, ever the pragmatist, countered with a meticulously planned, yet still highly dangerous, targeted embolization, citing published success rates, however slim. Their words, laced with Latin medical terms and references to obscure journals, flew like sparks in the tense atmosphere, each an attempt to exert intellectual dominance, to find a solution where none seemed to exist within their established frameworks. Safiya Rahman, a quiet ghost in her green scrubs, listened. Her eyes, usually downcast, now tracked Kaelan's struggling breaths, the frantic rhythm of the heart monitor, the subtle, telling tremors in Vargas's usually steady hand. She heard their brilliant pronouncements, their elaborate plans, and a quiet, unsettling certainty began to form in her gut. They were looking for a high-tech, complex solution to a primal, brutal problem. Their immense knowledge was, ironically, blinding them to the simple truth that screamed beneath the surface. Sometimes, the most sophisticated answer was not the best one. A minimally invasive approach could exacerbate the hemorrhage during entry, Vargas was saying, arguing against Li's latest suggestion. We need something more direct, yet less disruptive. Li scoffed, a barely audible sound. Less disruptive than an open chest cavity, Santiago? Your experimental methods are precisely what we need to avoid. This is not the time for heroics, it is the time for proven protocols, however slim their odds. Proven protocols are failing him, Jian. Vargas snapped, losing some of his practiced calm. It was then, as Kaelan's heart rate dipped dangerously, a sudden, sharp drop that silenced even their bickering, that Safiya felt a powerful jolt. The image flashed in her mind, a makeshift tent, the smell of dust and blood, a flickering kerosene lamp, and the urgent need to stop the bleeding, now, with whatever was at hand. She saw a pathway, a rough, unconventional path that sidestepped the very risks Vargas and Li were debating. It was crude, it was low-tech, but it could work. It had worked. Summoning a courage she rarely displayed, Safiya took a tentative step forward. "Doctors," she began, her voice a soft murmur, easily lost amidst the hum of machines and the doctor's rising anxiety. "Perhaps, if we were to consider a localized external pressure application, combined with a specific hemostatic agent delivery directly to the superficial fascia, we might buy him enough time to allow the clotting factors to stabilize naturally before any incision." Vargas, mid-sentence about a new arterial clamp, paused, turning a surprised, slightly annoyed gaze upon her. "Nurse Rahman," he said, his tone dripping with patronizing politeness, "thank you for your input. But I assure you, we are discussing highly specialized surgical techniques, not first aid." His dismissal was gentle but absolute, like swatting away a fly. Dr. Li, however, was less subtle. She barely spared Safiya a glance, her eyes still fixed on the monitor. "Nurse Rahman," she cut in, her voice like ice, "my focus is on saving this boy's life, not on discussing rudimentary field dressings. This is Olympus Medical, not some rural clinic. Kindly ensure the appropriate equipment is ready for Dr. Vargas's experimental procedure." Her words, sharp and dismissive, were a cold splash of water, designed to extinguish any flicker of independence. They stripped Safiya of her voice, reminding her, in no uncertain terms, of her place in the strict hierarchy of this elite institution. A flush of heat rose in Safiya's cheeks, a sting of humiliation, but it quickly gave way to a cold knot of resolve. She retreated a step, her hands clenching at her sides. They hadn't just dismissed her idea, they had dismissed her, categorized her as ignorant, irrelevant. But the image of Kaelan's fading breath, of the flickering light in his eyes, solidified her conviction. They were lost in the complexity, while death stalked in simplicity. And as Kaelan's heart monitor emitted another, more desperate, more sustained wail, Safiya knew she couldn't stay silent for long, no matter the cost to her quiet dignity. The rhythmic beep-beep-beep of Kaelan's heart monitor accelerated into a frantic, sustained shriek, a desperate alarm echoing the chaos unfolding within his young body. Safiya's humiliation from Dr. Li's sharp dismissal burned, a fresh wound, but it was instantly eclipsed by the primal terror unfurling in the room. Kaelan was slipping away, and with every frantic tremor of the monitor, the chasm between their complex procedures and his simple, urgent need for life-sustaining intervention grew wider. Dr. Vargas, his usual smooth confidence replaced by a furrowed brow of intense concentration, continued to bark orders, directing the surgical team to prep for an exploratory laparotomy, a last-ditch effort, inherently risky given Kaelan's rare clotting factor. Dr. Li, ever the intellectual, meticulously adjusted the intricate four lines, discussing hypotheticals with the attending residents, her voice a calm counterpoint to the rising panic, yet devoid of true solutions for the immediate crisis. They were brilliant, Safiya knew, masters of their craft, but they were trapped within the confines of established protocols, blind to the brutal immediacy of the situation. Their focus was on the how of a solution that was becoming increasingly impossible, not the what of a rapidly failing life. "His systolic is dropping again, doctor," a resident called out, voice strained. 70/40, and falling. Vargas cursed under his breath. "Increase the pressors. Get 2 more units of O-negative ready. Now." Safiya watched Kaelan, not the monitors. She saw the insidious spread of pallor beneath his skin, the frantic struggle of his chest to draw breath, the shallow, ineffective gasps that seemed to claw at the air. Her eyes drifted to the fresh, alarming stain blooming on the pristine surgical drape beneath him, a silent, terrifying testament to the internal hemorrhage that was winning. The pressure bandage they'd applied was saturated, but the bleed was deeper, more relentless. "Dr. Vargas," Safiya ventured again, her voice low but clear, cutting through the rising din. "The superficial compression isn't effective. His distal pulses are almost imperceptible, and his extremities are cooling rapidly. The blood loss isn't just internal, it's accelerating through the trauma site. We need to stem the outflow directly, not just manage the symptoms." Dr. Li finally looked up, her gaze icy. Nurse Rahman, we are aware of the patient's condition. This is precisely why we are preparing for surgery. Kindly maintain your position and assist where directed. We are not discussing emergency field amputations here. The sarcasm was a flick of the whip, designed to sting, to dismiss, to put Safiya back in her place. Vargas, too preoccupied, merely grunted, his attention fixed on the monitors, his face etched with growing desperation. He didn't even register her words, only the distracting interruption. A tremor ran through Safiya. They weren't just ignoring her, they were actively shutting her down, their expertise a shield against unconventional thought. But Kaelan, her patient, was dying. The critical error wasn't malice, but an adherence to a standard that was failing him. The very procedure they were debating, complex and invasive, would take too long, and his rare clotting factor made the risks astronomically high. Then, with a sudden, horrifying jolt, Kaelan's body arched, a violent spasm racking his frame. His eyes rolled back, revealing only whites, and a rattling, choked gasp tore from his throat, a sound of ultimate surrender. The heart monitor flatlined momentarily, its incessant shriek morphing into a long, terrifying drone before sputtering back to life, registering an abysmal, unsustainable 70 beats per minute, then rapidly falling. His blood pressure vanished from the screen entirely. "He's crashing," someone yelled, the controlled chaos dissolving into outright panic. "We're losing him." Li's voice, for the first time, held a tremor of genuine fear, her cold brilliance momentarily fractured. Vargas's commanding presence crumbled into raw, unadulterated terror. He looked at Kaelan, then at the unresponsive monitor, his face ashen. His fists clenched, helpless against the inevitable. In that agonizing silence, broken only by the frantic beeps of a dying heart, Safiya knew. There was no more time for humility, no more space for quiet dignity. The human stakes were too high. Kaelan's life, a vibrant young promise, was flickering out, and the doctors, for all their brilliance, were at a loss. They were lost in the complexity, while death stalked in brutal simplicity. And Safiya, the quiet nurse, held a knowledge born of necessity, of survival, that could bridge that gap. The path was clear, terrifying, but undeniable. She had to act. Isn't it amazing how often the quietest voices hold the most profound wisdom? Like Safiya, many of us have felt overlooked, our unique strengths underestimated. If her story of hidden talent finally shining through resonates with you, we invite you to become a vital part of our growing community. Hit that subscribe button. It's more than just a click, it's joining a global family that cherishes tales of perseverance and unexpected heroes. Your support helps us craft more impactful, high-quality narratives like Safiya's, stories that uplift and inspire. Let's champion these unsung heroes together. Welcome aboard! The chaotic din of a dying room, a symphony of alarm bells and panicked shouts, suddenly went silent, amplifying the frantic beat of Kaelan's heart monitor slowing, stuttering, giving up. Dr. Vargas stood frozen, his power stripped away by the raw, brutal reality of death. Dr. Li, usually a fortress of calm, now looked as lost as any intern, her eyes wide with a fear she couldn't hide. They had reached the end of their brilliant, conventional paths, and Kaelan was slipping into the abyss. In that suffocating vacuum, Safiya felt something shift deep inside her. The quiet, humble nurse, accustomed to blending into the background, felt an unfamiliar fire ignite. It wasn't anger, not entirely, but a fierce, primal defiance. She saw Kaelan, a young man with a life yet unlived, and she saw the faces of countless others in far-off lands, patients she had refused to let die against impossible odds. The silence stretched, a grave about to close. "Dr. Vargas." Safiya's voice, usually soft, sliced through the desolation with an unexpected clarity and force. Every head in the room snapped towards her. She didn't raise it, didn't shout, but her words carried an undeniable weight, a command. "There is another way. We can stabilize him." Vargas, startled out of his stupor, turned slowly, his eyes glazed with shock, then narrowed with a flicker of indignation. "Nurse Rahman, this is not the time for speculation. We have exhausted our options." His tone was dismissive, accustomed to her deference. No, Dr. Vargas, Safiya insisted, taking a step forward, her gaze unwavering. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear, fear of failure, fear of ridicule, fear of shattering the meticulous hierarchy of Olympus Medical. But the image of Kaelan's fading breath pushed her past it. You have exhausted your options. I have seen this. Not in textbooks, not in clean operating theaters, but where resources were scarce, and time was a luxury we didn't have. Dr. Li, regaining a fraction of her composure, stepped forward, her voice sharp with disbelief. Nurse Rahman, this is highly inappropriate. Are you suggesting you possess knowledge superior to two chief surgeons? Her eyes were cold, her accusation cutting. What exactly do you propose? A magic spell? Safiya ignored Li, focusing solely on Vargas, whose face was a canvas of conflicting emotions, skepticism, exhaustion, and a desperate, fragile thread of hope he didn't dare acknowledge. It's a specific, improvised method of external manipulation and focused pressure, using readily available tools. It's designed to buy us time, to slow the hemorrhage without opening him up, given his clotting factor issues. It won't cure him, but it will stabilize him enough for a safer, more definitive surgery. Her words were precise, confident, cutting through the high-minded medical jargon that had failed them. She wasn't just suggesting, she was outlining a plan. She was stepping out of the shadows, her hidden expertise finally demanding recognition. It was terrifying, like stepping onto a minefield, but the alternative was Kaelan's death, and that was a fear far greater. Vargas stared at her, then back at the flatlining monitor, then at Kaelan's rapidly paling face. His chest heaved, a man drowning. He saw the genuine conviction in Safiya's eyes, the stark, practical logic in her voice. He saw a solution where he had found only dead ends. Pride warred with desperation. His entire career had been built on established protocols, on cutting-edge technology, on his own undeniable brilliance. To yield to a rookie nurse, to an improvised method from a field hospital, it was anathema. But Kaelan was dying. Show me, Vargas said, the words barely a whisper, defeat and a desperate plea interwoven. The surrender in his voice was absolute. Do it. Anything. Just save him. A collective gasp went through the room. Li's jaw dropped, her face a mask of outrage and disbelief. Junior doctors exchanged wide-eyed glances. Safiya felt a surge of adrenaline, not from fear, but from the sudden, weighty responsibility. The transformation was complete. The quiet nurse was gone. In her place stood a leader, forged in the crucible of impossible situations. Clear the space, Safiya commanded, her voice now ringing with authority. She moved with purpose, grabbing supplies, her movements fluid and efficient. Someone get me 2 large, sterile compression pads and the arterial clamps from Tracy, Nurse Miller. I need you to monitor his vitals specifically for any subtle changes in pulse and respiration. Dr. Li, I need your expertise here, for real-time diagnostics. She was delegating, assigning tasks to doctors who, moments before, had dismissed her. The shift in the room was palpable. Skepticism remained in many eyes, but it was now laced with curiosity, and for some, a glimmer of awe. They watched her, this humble woman, as she took command, her hands moving with a surgeon's grace, her mind already charting the complex dance of pressure and precision that would determine Kaelan's fate. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now dwarfed by an unwavering resolve, a sacred promise to a life hanging by a thread. She was no longer just a nurse, she was a conduit for survival. She had to act, and now, finally, she could. The operating room, once a whirlwind of panicked activity, had fallen into an almost unnatural quiet, punctuated only by the steady, urgent beeps of Kaelan's monitors. Safiya moved with a grace that belonged more to a seasoned maestro than a rookie nurse. Her eyes, usually downcast, were now alight with an intense, singular focus. She called for a specific, oddly shaped instrument, a set of broad, blunt-tipped clamps, typically used for non-invasive manipulation, not internal hemorrhage. Dr. Li, watching, frowned. This was not in any textbook. This was not Olympus protocol. Safiya ignored the skepticism radiating from the elite surgeons. Her attention was solely on Kaelan, whose pale, sweat-slicked skin seemed to grow more translucent with each passing second. "Nurse Miller, position him slightly to the left, precisely like that." "Hold steady," she instructed, her voice a low, melodic hum of control. Her strong, calloused fingers, surprisingly nimble, pressed gently but firmly against a specific point on Kaelan's lower abdomen, just above the hip bone. She wasn't seeking a surgical entry, she was searching for a deeper, more subtle landmark, a precise echo of the internal injury. It was an act of pure, intuitive topography, guided by a map unseen by anyone else in the room. Dr. Vargas, initially bristling at being relegated to observer, found himself leaning forward, a strange mix of disbelief and morbid curiosity twisting his features. He watched Safiya's hands as they meticulously, almost reverently, applied the blunt clamps. It wasn't an incision, but an external application, pressing down with carefully calibrated force, finding a hidden pathway to apply counterpressure against the suspected internal bleed. It was an improvisation so audacious, so far outside the realm of formal surgical training, that it bordered on lunacy. Yet, the quiet confidence in Safiya's posture, the unwavering certainty in her eyes, held him captive. He wanted to object, to scream about malpractice, but Kaelan's fading life mocked every convention. A tense minute stretched into 2, then 3. The only sound was the rhythmic thump-thump beep of the heart monitor and Safiya's soft, almost whispered reassurances to Kaelan, as if talking to him would keep him tethered to life. Beads of sweat dotted her brow, but her hands never wavered. She was a statue of precision, her muscles taut with the effort of maintaining exact pressure. Dr. Li, analytical to her core, found herself struggling to reconcile what she was seeing. Every instinct, every year of rigorous training, screamed wrong. Yet, her brilliant mind, accustomed to pattern recognition, began to pick up subtle shifts. Kaelan's oxygen saturation, which had been in a terrifying freefall, seemed to hesitate, then, miraculously, plateau. The erratic rhythm of his pulse, a desperate gallop towards oblivion, showed the faintest flicker of regularity. It was barely perceptible, a whisper against the roaring storm, but it was something. The air in the room thickened, laden with a palpable, almost unbearable tension. Every eye was glued to Safiya, to the strange, non-invasive dance she performed on the edge of life and death. Fear for Kaelan was still a cold, hard knot in every stomach, but it was now interlaced with a burgeoning, terrifying awe. They watched her, this unassuming nurse, circumventing years of medical dogma with an elemental, almost brutal efficiency. Her method was crude, unsophisticated, yet it seemed to be working where their most advanced techniques had failed. Suddenly, Dr. Vargas gasped, a sound torn from his chest. The monitors had shifted again. Kaelan's heart rate, though still rapid, was stronger, more regular. His blood pressure, which had been dipping precariously low, showed a hesitant rise. The faintest flush of color, a mere ghost of warmth, seemed to return to Kaelan's ashen cheeks. It was not a recovery, not yet, but it was a halt to the precipitous decline. The bleeding, which had been a relentless torrent, was now, impossibly, slowing. Safiya, her breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps, maintained her pressure, her gaze unwavering. She felt the subtle changes beneath her fingers, a quiet triumph in the face of impossible odds. The silence in the room was no longer one of skeptical scorn, but of stunned reverence. Dr. Li, her face a mask of profound disbelief, approached the monitor, confirming the changes with her own eyes. Her intellectual fortress was crumbling. This shouldn't be possible. This couldn't be happening. Yet, it was. Safiya Rahman, the quiet, overlooked nurse, was, against all odds, pulling Kaelan O'Connor back from the brink. The sheer audacity, the raw, undeniable effectiveness of her improvised technique was rewriting their understanding of medicine, one precise, terrifying moment at a time. The real fight, the repair, still lay ahead, but the immediate crisis, the immediate threat of Kaelan bleeding out, had, for now, been confronted, and remarkably, repelled. Safiya's hands, though still precise, now trembled with a barely perceptible tremor, not of uncertainty, but of the monumental effort holding her together. Every nerve ending screamed, every muscle fiber protested, but her gaze remained locked on the small, vital area, her fingers weaving the last strands of her improvised solution. The silence in the room, once thick with judgment and disbelief, was now utterly absolute, broken only by the rhythmic, steady beat-beep of Kaelan's heart monitor, a sound that had, mere moments ago, been a frantic, dying drumroll, and was now a lifeline. She made the final adjustment, a meticulous, almost imperceptible shift of pressure, and then, with a deep, shuddering breath, she slowly, carefully, released her direct hold. It was done. The materials, gathered in haste and applied with impossible skill, now held Kaelan's fragile life together. Her arms, which had maintained an unwavering, unnatural posture for what felt like an eternity, dropped to her sides, heavy and aching. A gasp, half-choked, escaped her lips, a silent scream of exhaustion, of release. Every eye in the room was fixed on the monitor. The numbers, once spiraling into oblivion, were not just stable, they were improving. Kaelan's blood pressure, a death knell just moments prior, was creeping back into a viable range. The frantic red lines on the screen softened, becoming less jagged, more rhythmic, a visual sigh of relief. The pallor that had bleached Kaelan's young face was subtly, miraculously, beginning to recede, a faint flush of life returning to his cheeks. His breathing, previously ragged and shallow, deepened, becoming more even, less desperate. Dr. Vargas, who had stood frozen, his face a canvas of escalating dread, let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. It was a sound like air rushing from a punctured lung, a raw, involuntary exhalation of terror finally abating. His shoulders, previously hunched in defeat, sagged not with exhaustion, but with a sudden, profound release. He ran a trembling hand through his hair, his eyes wide, glazed with something akin to awe. This wasn't just survival, this was a resurrection. Dr. Li, usually a bastion of cool, scientific detachment, stood utterly motionless, her gaze riveted to Kaelan's improving vital signs. Her intellectual fortress, built on years of rigorous training and irrefutable data, was not just crumbling, it had been utterly demolished by the raw, undeniable efficacy of Safiya's impossible intervention. The corners of her lips twitched, a battle playing out behind her eyes, the struggle between her deeply ingrained skepticism and the irrefutable truth unfolding before her. She saw the evidence, she processed the data, and it rewrote everything she knew. A single, almost imperceptible tear traced a path down her cheek, a silent testament to the sheer, emotional weight of witnessing the impossible. The other nurses and residents, who had been holding their breath collectively, now released it in a collective, whispered murmur. It wasn't loud, but it was a tidal wave of relief that swept through the room, washing away the suffocating despair that had clung to every surface. Faces, previously etched with grim resignation, softened, eyes glistening with tears of relief and nascent admiration. A few wiped their own eyes, unable to contain the surge of emotion. Safiya swayed on her feet, the adrenaline that had fueled her for so long now rapidly draining. A wave of lightheadedness washed over her, making the room tilt slightly. Her knees felt like jelly, her hands, still slightly stained with blood, began to shake uncontrollably. But beneath the profound exhaustion, a warmth spread through her chest, not pride, not ego, but the deep, quiet satisfaction of a life saved, of a battle fought and won against overwhelming odds. She had pushed through the scorn, the disbelief, the suffocating pressure, and she had delivered. The air in the room, thick with despair moments ago, suddenly felt lighter, breathable. The tension that had been a physical weight on everyone's shoulders dissolved, replaced by a fragile tendril of hope. Kaelan O'Connor, who had been staring into the abyss, was still here. His future, once ripped away, was now precariously but firmly tethered back to the land of the living, thanks to the quiet, overlooked nurse whose expertise ran deeper than any textbook could teach. The procedure was complete. The bleeding had stopped. Life, against all logical expectation, had triumphed. And in that triumphant silence, a new respect for Safiya Rahman began to blossom in the stunned hearts of Olympus Medical's elite. The air in the operating theater was thick with the scent of antiseptic and a profound, weighty silence. It wasn't merely the absence of sound, it was the hush of disbelief, of awe, of a collective breath held and slowly, tentatively released. Moments before, the room had been a maelstrom of desperate activity, a battleground against encroaching death. Now, Kaelan O'Connor's vital signs, once a furious, flickering warning, were settling into a stable, rhythmic hum. The bleeding had indeed stopped. Safiya Rahman, standing amidst the controlled chaos she had just navigated, felt a tremor of exhaustion run through her, but it was overshadowed by the quiet, fierce pulse of gratitude that Kaelan would live. She carefully laid down the last of her improvised tools, her movements still precise, though a profound weariness had begun to settle into her bones. All eyes in the room were fixed on her. The nurses, who had assisted with a blend of apprehension and dawning respect, now looked at her with unvarnished admiration. Dr. Jian Li, typically a fortress of cool, clinical detachment, stood frozen, her eyes, usually sharp with critical assessment, now wide with a disconcerting mix of shock and reluctant acknowledgement. Her entire understanding of protocol, of hierarchy, of predictable outcomes, had just been upended. Her meticulously constructed world of medical certainty had a sudden, gaping hole blown through it. It was Dr. Santiago Vargas who finally broke the profound quiet. His posture, usually imbued with an almost theatrical authority, was now slightly slumped, his shoulders eased from the crushing weight of responsibility he had just relinquished. He pushed a hand through his already disheveled hair, his gaze locked on Safiya. His voice, usually booming and confident, was now hushed, laced with an almost childlike wonder that was utterly uncharacteristic. "Nurse Rahman," he began, the words sounding foreign, as if he were relearning how to speak. He took a hesitant step closer, his eyes scanning her, trying to reconcile the unassuming figure before him with the extraordinary performance he had just witnessed. His expression was a tapestry of awe, confusion, and a deep, dawning respect. Who taught you that?" The question hung in the sterile air, heavy with unspoken implications. It wasn't just about the technique, it was about the calm under pressure, the audacious ingenuity, the sheer, undeniable competence that defied all their assumptions about the quiet, entry-level nurse. It was the question of a mind grappling with a reality that had just radically shifted. Safiya turned to face him, her face smudged with a streak of dried blood, her eyes tired but clear. She didn't puff out her chest with pride, or relish the moment of her vindication. There was no flicker of triumph, no hint of "I told you so." Instead, she simply met his gaze, her expression open, weary, and utterly devoid of pretense. "Field hospitals," she replied, her voice soft but clear, carrying easily through the now silent room. Her eyes, for a brief moment, seemed to look beyond the pristine walls of Olympus Medical, into a distant, harsher landscape. Afghanistan. The two words landed like a physical blow, reverberating through the space. Afghanistan. Not an elite university. Not a groundbreaking medical fellowship. Not years under a celebrated mentor in a sterile research lab. But a war zone. A place of dust, chaos, limited resources, and the constant, urgent pressure of life and death. The revelation wasn't merely a credential, it was a profound insight into who Safiya Rahman was. It explained everything: her composure under fire, her ability to improvise with such audacious brilliance, her almost preternatural calm in the face of absolute despair. It was the story of a crucible, a forge where ordinary skills were sharpened into extraordinary instincts, where textbooks were replaced by the brutal, immediate lessons of survival. Dr. Li, who had initially dismissed Safiya with such disdain, now felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the cool air conditioning. Her dismissiveness had not been merely professional, it had been a judgment of Safiya's perceived lack of pedigree, a dismissal rooted in the rigid hierarchies of Olympus Medical. Now, the weight of her own arrogance pressed down on her. She saw not just a skilled nurse, but a survivor, a veteran of a different kind of war, whose experience dwarfed her own sheltered academic brilliance. The very ground beneath her carefully constructed world of meritocracy seemed to tilt. Vargas, too, felt the impact of her words deep within him. He had seen the best surgeons, the most brilliant minds. But he had never witnessed such raw, distilled mastery born not of prestige, but of necessity. His initial shock gave way to a wave of profound respect, tinged with a distinct sense of humility. He had almost let a young man die because he couldn't see past the quiet uniform, couldn't fathom the depth of knowledge hidden beneath a humble exterior. He hadn't just been proven wrong, he had been given a vital, humbling lesson in what true expertise looked like. A palpable shift occurred in the room. Safiya was no longer just a rookie, a quiet background figure. She was an authority, validated not by a prestigious degree on a wall, but by the irrefutable truth of a life she had snatched back from the brink. The recognition wasn't just for her hands, but for her heart, her resilience, her unwavering commitment forged in the fires of unimaginable trauma. Yet, even as the weight of their collective admiration settled upon her, Safiya remained herself. Her gaze drifted back to Kaelan, a faint, almost imperceptible nod of satisfaction passing between her and the still, pale athlete. For her, the job was done, the patient stable. The validation she felt was internal, a quiet resonance of her purpose, far deeper than any external praise. The transformation wasn't in her becoming someone else, but in everyone else finally seeing her for who she had been all along. Kaelan O'Connor's recovery was nothing short of miraculous, a testament to the fragile line between life and death and the extraordinary intervention that had pulled him back. Within days, the young athlete began to stir, then speak, his body slowly reclaiming its vitality. The immediate danger had passed, the unconventional sutures holding firm, allowing his rare clotting factor to stabilize without further complication. He would still need extensive rehabilitation, but his future, once extinguished, now glimmered with the promise of a life fully lived, perhaps even a return to the sport he loved. His gratitude to Safiya, once he was lucid enough to understand, was profound, a silent understanding passing between them that transcended words. He saw not just a nurse, but a guardian angel, a quiet force who had refused to let him go. For Safiya, the experience was a validation not of her desire for fame or promotion, but of her inherent purpose. She didn't undergo a drastic personality change, nor did she suddenly demand a corner office. Her quiet humility remained, her focus unwavering on patient care. Yet, everything around her had shifted. The whispered conversations in the halls now spoke of her with reverence. Nurses sought her out for advice, not just on practical matters, but on navigating the pressures of Olympus Medical. Doctors, once quick to dismiss her, now listened intently when she offered an observation, their faces betraying a newfound respect. She found herself subtly included in more complex case discussions, her unique perspective now valued, not just tolerated. The white noise of professional skepticism that had once surrounded her had receded, replaced by an atmosphere of quiet acknowledgement. She moved through Olympus with the same measured grace, but now, a subtle, almost imperceptible aura of earned authority preceded her, a testament to her unyielding skill and quiet strength. Dr. Santiago Vargas's transformation was perhaps the most striking. The arrogance that had once defined him, the confident dismissiveness, was gone, replaced by a deep, introspective humility. The question, "Who taught you that?" lingered in his mind not as a challenge, but as a profound personal interrogation. He had prided himself on his extensive knowledge, his elite training, yet Safiya's simple, life-saving technique had exposed a gaping blind spot in his own education. The invaluable lessons learned outside sterile operating theaters, and the crucible of necessity. He began to approach his work with a new openness, his diagnostic process no longer solely reliant on textbook protocols, but also on keen observation and a willingness to consider unconventional solutions. His interactions with Safiya were marked by a genuine deference, a mentorship in reverse, as he sought to understand the pragmatism and resourcefulness she embodied. He found himself not only respecting her but learning from her, recognizing that true leadership wasn't about knowing everything, but about knowing when to listen, when to yield, and when to champion expertise that lay beyond one's own horizon. Olympus Medical, under his renewed influence, slowly began to foster an environment where innovation wasn't feared, but cautiously encouraged, and where the wisdom of every team member, regardless of title, held weight. Dr. Jian Li's reaction was far more subdued, her pride too deeply ingrained for an immediate, outward shift. The experience had been a public, undeniable challenge to her rigid worldview. To witness a rookie nurse, whom she had scorned, perform a life-saving procedure with such unassuming brilliance was a bitter pill to swallow. Her reputation, meticulously cultivated, had been momentarily eclipsed. She didn't apologize, nor did she offer effusive praise. Instead, her quiet analytical mind, always processing, was forced to reevaluate. She became more observant, her sharp eyes missing nothing, especially when Safiya was involved in a complex case. There was a grudging respect, a cautious acknowledgement that some forms of knowledge simply couldn't be catalogued in medical journals or earned through prestigious fellowships. While the immediate shift in her demeanor was minimal, an internal crack had formed in her fortress of by-the-book certitude. She was still doctorly, brilliant and meticulous, but perhaps now, a tiny flicker of doubt, a nascent openness to the unpredictable, had begun to stir within her. The incident resonated through Olympus Medical, a quiet but profound tremor that subtly rearranged its hierarchical foundations. It served as a powerful reminder that expertise wears many faces, and that true healing often demands a blend of cutting-edge science and timeless ingenuity. The hospital, once a bastion of rigid protocol and status, slowly began to embrace a broader definition of competence. It was a beacon of hope for every overlooked intern, every quiet nurse, every unsung hero in the medical profession, a testament to the power of hidden strengths finally being seen. Safiya Rahman, still the quiet, humble nurse, continued her work with the same unwavering dedication. The validation she craved wasn't the applause, but the renewed beat of a heart, the steady breath of a patient. Her past, once a silent burden of extraordinary experience, was now her profound strength, teaching Olympus Medical that the most valuable lessons are often found not in textbooks, but in the crucible of human need, and taught by the most unexpected of teachers. She stood as a living embodiment of the notion that true power lies not in position or prestige, but in purpose, resilience, and the quiet, unyielding courage to save a life, no matter the cost to one's own anonymity. Safiya's journey beautifully reminds us that true heroism often resides in the quiet resilience of those who serve with profound purpose, their strengths forged in the most demanding crucibles. What unexpected wisdom or hidden expertise have you witnessed that went unacknowledged, only to shine brightest when it truly mattered? If Safiya's story resonated with you, we warmly invite you to subscribe and become a valued part of our global community. Your support empowers us to continue sharing more inspiring narratives that celebrate the quiet heroes among us. Thank you for watching, for believing in the power of storytelling, and for being an essential part of our journey together. We truly appreciate you,